There are some people, and particularly some families, that truly are what you might call untouchable. No matter what happens, what they might do, or how far they might go off course, they never seem to face any real consequences. Their sins and misdeeds are neatly covered up and swept under the carpet, from financial missteps all the way up to murder. One of those families is a majority partner owner in one of the country's biggest supermarket chains. I'm not saying their name is on the brand, but they are definitely deeply involved, filthy rich, and completely untouchable. Trust me, I know. I worked in one of those supermarket chains for over 10 years. Initially, I was stacking shelves and working tills, but once I got my training, I moved on to the butcher's counter. Unlike some other grocery stores where the meat is simply pre-packaged, wrapped in plastic, and served up ready-made, this chain of stores had an actual butcher's counter where we would make cuts from the meat that was sent to us from the suppliers and would serve it up exactly as the customer requested. The particular supplier that did the meat for us was a farm, the name of which I can't give away for legal reasons. All I can say is that this particular supplier is no longer on the books for the supermarket chain, and with good reason. Despite being on the butcher's counter and being employed to make the cuts as the customer asked, for some reason we started receiving the meat from the supplier pre-cut and packaged, which already didn't make sense. Me and my mates used to joke about it, the fact that we would need to open up the packaged meat only to put it out on the counter and then pack it up again for the customer. The first time I suspected that there was something wrong with the meat, it came as a rumor. One of my friends, Mike, working on the customer services desk, told me that he'd had a customer return a pack of meat in which she had found teeth. Now that might sound like a wild story that would make headlines, but genuinely, it's not that rare. In minced beef, in sausages and other mash products, it's actually more common than you'd think to stumble across a hard piece of hoof or a tooth or bone from the animal that has somehow found its way in. The problem with this discovery, however, was that it wasn't a cow's tooth. It was a human tooth, and a gold one at that. Aside from the obvious safety hazard of having something like a tooth in the meat that people are planning to eat, the real question is how something so obviously human found its way into animal meat, unless of course the meat isn't beef in the first place. My friend apologized, gave the woman a refund and binned the offending product. Counting his lucky stars that the old girl didn't decide to go to the papers, he told the management and they promised to get in touch with our supplier. I'm not sure they ever did. A month later I found something worse. In amongst a kilo of mince that had come to us, there were black and silver metallic pieces. Clearly some device or a piece of machinery had gotten into the mincer and been crushed or pulped. I binned the whole batch, but I kept the pieces that I'd found and showed them to a friend of mine, who identified the components immediately. They were from a pacemaker, the device that people have inserted into their chests to have their heart rates controlled. A device used on people, humans. So again, how did it end up in that meat, and just how animal was that meat in the first place? From that point on, I started looking more closely at the pre-packaged meats, measuring the width of the bones and noting how many of them were not large or wide enough to be cow's bones, seeing how the marbling in some packs seemed far more fatty than others, and discovering on one topside roast the remnants of what looked distinctly like a tattoo on the scrap of remaining skin. By that point, I had no doubt that somewhere along the line, human meat or products were being folded into the meat coming from this supplier. In July of that year, I handed in my notice and contacted the police. Around a month later, I received a letter to say that my complaint had been logged, but no further action would be taken. I was stunned. How could they allow something like this to just keep happening? The answer is not that they didn't find a crime, but that they are scared to offend the ones who committed it. I threatened to go to the newspapers and received another letter. This one had a check for a very substantial sum inside and a non-disclosure order for me to sign. Take the money and shut your mouth was basically the message. The letter explained that an internal investigation by the grocery chain had revealed anomalies in the meat supply and that the supplier would be discontinued. The farm was closed, and in an astonishing coincidence, all 5 farm buildings burnt to the ground within a month of my complaint. What my own research has uncovered, however, is that the supplier or farm that the meat came from was initially owned by the youngest son of the family that owns the entire supermarket chain. Apparently, this son is a somewhat shady character, not above disappearing those people who get in his way. He has, they say, made a large number of enemies over the years, enemies that I get a feeling will be far more quiet from now on. Sometimes when you're investigating a crime, even something as minor as a grocery store break-in, the entire thing works like a chain or thread, one link leading to the next. You go there looking for one thing, and you find something entirely different. Look for one crime, and you find another and another. Sometimes, though, you find things you perhaps would rather not have, things beyond what you might ever have believed. The original crime I was investigating was the theft of several pallets of alcohol and cigarettes from the storeroom of a major grocery chain. The crime had been reported by a member of the public who had seen the robbers in ski masks breaking in at the back of the 24-hour store at around 3 a.m. The first suspicious thing about this crime was not the nature of the act. However, it was the fact that the grocery store itself did not report it. Several £1,000s worth of alcohol and cigarettes had been stolen from the store, and yet they never felt the need to report the incident or get in touch with the authorities. It made no sense. On looking into the incident, I asked if I could see the CCTV footage from the storeroom, and even in the store itself. These were duly handed over with very little fanfare and not a word of complaint. What was on them, however, was as stunning as it was confusing. The robbery itself was basic. A van pulled up to the outside. Men climbed out and using crowbars opened the storage silo to steal the goods. So far so normal. The real issue, however, was with the in-store footage. Running through the tape quite quickly and expecting not to find much of use, I at first thought that there was a fault with the footage. Looking more closely, however, I saw that there was no mistake. Despite the late hour, the grocery store was still busy. Shift workers and folks trying to avoid the crowds during the day did their shopping in the early hours, and the tills were still ringing, making quite a tidy profit. People were browsing, the shelves were full, and folks could be seen pushing their trolley and browsing the products, until everything stopped. At around 3:15 a.m., the same time that the robbery was coincidentally happening outside, the entire place went on pause. People walking through the aisles, folks with products in their hands, and people working the tills and helping to pack the bags, simply froze in place as if someone had hit the pause button or the entire place was playing a game of musical statues. As the shoppers remained frozen in place, their limbs, movements, and even their facial expressions entirely fixed, 3 or 4 men, 2 in white coats, entered the building and walked amongst them. Everyone else was fixed in place, but these people moved between them like they were trees in a forest. Periodically, one of the men would take out a stethoscope and check the heartbeat of one of the shoppers. In another aisle, they would shine a torch into the eyes and check the reflexes of the frozen people. For nearly 25 minutes, the men moved amongst and between the frozen people, taking measurements and using various instruments to check vitals and other information. They then left by the front entrance, and after another 5 minutes, the people suddenly snapped back into action, picking up where they left off as if nothing had happened, and with no clue that anything strange had occurred. To this day, I have no idea what I actually saw happening on that tape. Was it some sort of experiment, carried out on the unsuspecting public without their consent? Was there something that triggered the pause? A gas released or a loud sound played over the tannoy at a certain frequency that stunned them into silence? Was it a test of some kind of weapon? A method of freezing an enemy army so that they could then be mown down with almost no resistance? Who knew that this was happening? And who were the men running the tests? I have no answers, only a very strange video of a very strange incident, a video which I no longer possess. Having submitted it to evidence just as I was supposed to, I was informed that the tape had been misplaced. By whom and for what reason I do not know. What I do know is that I was asked to modify my official report. I was told to concentrate on the matter I was investigating rather than on strange incidents I might just have happened to stumble across. I wrote an amended report, and the original was redacted to the point of being unreadable. Clearly someone does not want us to know what was happening, or what could in theory happen to you as you go about your weekly shop.